Good afternoon or good evening or good morning from wherever you're joining us from today. My name's Sarah and I'm the Program and Event Manager at the Reactor in Sydney, Australia. Welcome to another Microsoft Reactor Sydney live stream event. Today I would like to welcome back again for the third episode our cloud advocate Renee Noble. We're doing a series this month called Code to Cloud. So firstly, a bit of background on Renee for whoever is joining us here for the first time today. So Renee is obviously our cloud advocate for Microsoft in Australia, and she is a self-proclaimed Jane of all trades. She's worked in government doing ML and Python backend, full stack in the ed tech startup sector, and dabbles with embedded tech. In her spare time, she leads the Girls Programming Network for women and girls to realize their potential as techies. She's also started a business to help bring exciting coding opportunities to kids and teachers, which you can see behind her there on screen, and you'll get more information on that on her full bio. So today we'll be speaking for about 40 minutes with 10 minutes for questions. However, do ask questions throughout, and we'll in the comment section there, and we'll try and answer as many as possible. And also at the conclusion, we'll share with you a link to our feedback survey with the event code, which we'll share a bit later on. If you have time to fill that out, that would be awesome. We'll also be sharing with you a link to our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you'd like to reference back from today's session, you can do so straight away on demand after the session. But for now, without further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Renee to begin. Thanks, Renee. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Super excited to be here with you all again today for episode 3 of Code to Cloud. Today, we're going to be making RSVPs to our event and storing it in the cloud with Azure Blob. So that's our focus today. First up, I'm just flagging that there's some really good links that I used when I was putting this together myself. So jump on the series page for the Code to Cloud series, and I will show you through some of the docs later because it's super helpful for getting Azure Blob set up, and it's super fun and friendly to use, like when you have the right resources and you've got all the right lines of code to write. And also, don't forget, you can also sign up for a free subscription and trial with Azure, especially if you're a student. Super great. You get a bunch of free credit, and you get some free credit as well if you're a professional. Super great if you're a student. You don't have to put in your credit card or anything to get started, so don't worry about that. So check them out. They're also linked on the series page. So in today's episode, we're going to show you, go through the pull request showcase, and then we're going to jump into websites and data. So how is data normally stored on websites, and why we're not actually going to do that, just because we're doing something a little bit different for our nice simple web app. Then we're going to start collecting our RSVPs. We're going to write some JavaScript there and use an API. We'll cover what APIs are a little bit as well. And then we're going to get to storing that data we've collected for our RSVPs with Azure Blob in the cloud. And then we're going to have a sneak peek at what's next week. So first up to the pull request showcase, apparently nobody likes homework or something. Like, I didn't know that was a thing, but we haven't got any today. I'm hoping that some more will come in for next week, because we had like 9 or so people actually fork the repo. I haven't actually checked the updated numbers, so that was from the first week. So there's a bunch of people out there working on them. Maybe there's just some really like detailed designs coming in. I don't know. I'm really keen to see them in the future. If you do have any questions and you really want to submit something for the pull request showcase, do feel free to get in touch with me on Twitter. You can find my Twitter handle on the series page, but it's noble_Renee on Twitter. And feel free to DM me or submit a question via my website as well. And I'm happy to get back to you if you got stuck on anything, because I'd really love to see anything that you want to code and have showcased here and on Twitter, because I feel like everyone can use as much exposure as they can get. So let me give you some of it. So on to websites and data. What are we doing today? We're making an Rsvp button. So what could that possibly look like? Well, when you think of RSVPs, you go, okay, maybe yes or no, maybe I'm attending, maybe that's what you have seen on something like Facebook. But at the core of it, it could be simply a list of attendees. Here's who's actually going to come to the event. Or it could be a list of everyone you've invited. Yes, 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 no, who is or isn't coming. There's a bunch of different ways the data could actually look. But when you think about something like Facebook events, there's actually a lot more data behind the scenes. And the way that it's stored is a lot more complicated than just a list of who is and isn't coming. So I'm talking about relational databases here. And something like Facebook, it has a lot of different tables of data. So we've got our user table, so that would be everyone who has a Facebook account. Then we'd have our event table, every event that's ever been created on Facebook. And then for every time someone clicks, yes, I'm attending, or no, I'm not, or maybe I am, or they haven't clicked anything so far, then you would have a bunch of different things in an events response table, which would say, hey, if you're going to look at this event, Tim's birthday party, and Mel's been invited, then we can see that, yes, Mel has said that she will be attending the party. So we have actually 3 different tables of data, and we have to look between all of them to actually form the list that you might see if you go to a Facebook event and see who said that they're attending. So does it need to be that complicated when we just want to have a list of who's coming to our events who've made on our super basic website? Well, no, it doesn't. Like, if we were going to make something much bigger and we wanted to, have everyone need to log into it and have a lot of interfaces for interacting with all of that data, then maybe we'd want to go with something a lot bigger. And if we were doing any sort of proper development, for a large scale audience, then that's what we do, because having those different tables means we can query them in a bunch of different ways. But for the purposes of our event, we just kind of want to have a list at the end of the day, maybe a file we can open up and say, hey, these are the people who are coming to my event. If you're using this for your wedding or for your birthday party, and you just wanted a fun little invitation, you don't want to have to implement all of those database tables. So let's do something simpler today. And we're going to just make a list of who is coming to our party. We're not even going to care about people who aren't coming to the party. We're just going to leave them off. They just don't RSVP at all. If you do RSVP, you get to be in the list. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to store it in a TXT file. That's all we need to do here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go back to our old friend, our party invitation. We're going to add an Rsvp button. And I think it will also be fun that when you click the button, not only does all the data and stuff get sent, but also we're going to show a little message that says, see you there. Once you click the button, that is. And then with the Rsvp, we're going to use a post request to send a message, send all the data about who is coming to what event to our server. And then we're going to put that in a file, and then we're going to put that file into the cloud and store it with Azure Blob. So first up, we are going to start by adding our button, then making the button, change the page that we're looking at, adding that little bit of text saying we'll see you there, and send data to an API to get a response, just to say, hey, here's some data, and just to get the okie dokie, we got your data back from them. So let's jump over to our code. If I can find it. Here we go. So first up, we are going to make a button. So we're going to jump to our classic kids party invitation. It's still a good one. And what we're going to be doing is adding the button at the bottom here, and we're going to be putting it inside of the div. Also, hello to everybody who's saying hello in the chat. Do tell me who you are, where you're from, where you are on your coding journey. I'd love to say hi to you all. Got Sarah joining from the Gold Coast, and I promise I can say Bangalore. They're joining us again. Thank you for the team over in India. Love to have you on board, and love to see you in the comments as well. So please do say hi, and I'll say hi back. So let's jump in. Down to here, we're going to be forming our button at the bottom. So we're going to start with a button tag. And I'm going to give it an ID, just, so then later we can refer to it. And I'm going to call it Rsvp-button. Be right on the nose there, very clear. That's what's going on there. Okay. So next up, we're going to want to do something. So when we make a button, we're going to say on click, we want it to, and we're going to give it a function that we want it to use. So I'm going to make a function in a second called send Rsvp. And that's going to do the job of doing all the stuff that we want to happen when we click the button. So that might be sending off the data. That might be making the button so you can't click it again. So graying it out, which I think we want to do. Otherwise, people will just keep clicking and RSVPing to our event, which wouldn't be ideal. And we also want to make our little see you there paragraph appear. So let's add those into that function when we make it. So we're going to say send Rsvp. And when we send it, I'm going to want to give it a value, because the thing that we're wanting to send off is going to be what event they're attending. And so we're going to create something called an event ID, which I'm just making up. And it could be anything, as we saw in our tables before. They had, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're just going to make it be the name of the event and who's running it. And then we also want to see who's coming to the event as well. So we're going to put all of that into our value. For now, let's actually just finish adding our button. So I'm just going to leave this value out, and we're just going to see what happens. Okay. And we're going to want to have some text on the button. So I'm just pasting this in here. So I'll be there is what the Rsvp button is going to say. You could also make it say Rsvp here or whatever you wanted, but that goes in the middle here of our tags. Okay, while we're in the HTML, I'm also going to add our hidden text that won't show up originally. So when people load the page, we don't want them to see, I'll see you there, because they haven't yet decided if they're going to attend. So I'm going to make a heading because I want it to be nice and big, and I'm going to give it an ID, so then later we can refer to it and say, hey, this should now be visible. So I'm going to call it see you there, just so it's really clear. And we're going to say it's hidden at the start. So hidden is true. And then close off our tags, and so you don't have to watch me type. I'm going to chuck this in here with this emoji I prepared earlier. So we've got this heading hanging out, but you won't be able to see it at the start. So let's actually just go and have a look at our site so far. So we'll run our server. And we will open it up here. And now we've got a button there. We're just going to leave it like that. We could make it beautiful with some styling. And then we can click it, but nothing happens because we haven't actually made the function that does that yet. So it's probably freaking out actually in the console, being like, I don't know what this function is. So let's give it a function and then let's see it actually do something. So back to our, well, we're finished up here, but we're going to make a new file, which we're also going to put in static. And we're going to call it rsvp.js. So we're making a JavaScript file. So new file here, rsvp.js. And we do need to do one more thing in our HTML, which is at the bottom. We need to tell it to include that file. So when you're including JavaScript, it's typical to include it at the end of the file because you don't want your JavaScript to load, and it might have some things that it does as soon as it loads. But if we were to load in the JavaScript first before our browser had time to add all of these elements, our paragraphs and headings and buttons to the screen, then it might try and do those things before those elements exist, and then it can't, and then it won't do them when they do come into existence. So we're going to start, well, we're going to put it right at the end and just say, hey, there's some JavaScript over in static/rsvp.js, and you should grab that, and we'll be needing that for this file. And that's where we're going to go to add our function. So you can add just a regular function here, but I'm actually going to add an async function, which will be important later. For the start, I'm just going to show you the function just working. And we're just going to do console.log. You can say the button was pressed. Okay. So let's do it on the top. We're going to have a look in the console and hope that it's all there. The button was pressed. So every time I press the button, the number is going up of how many times I have said the button was pressed. So I've said it a lot of times there, which is cool. The button works. Great. Also, if at any point you think the screen is too small, please do say so in the comments. I'm always happy to make it bigger if it makes this more accessible for you to watch at home. So we've got our button working, but it doesn't actually do anything useful yet. So also we haven't actually closed off our thing. So I'm sorry, JavaScript. We need, I mostly write Python, so I don't have to worry about all of our brackets and things, but today I am writing JavaScript. So we need all of these bits and pieces here. So we're using an async function today because we're going to be sending data and then we're waiting to get a response back. And imagine if you were sending a really large packet of data or sending something to a server that might be far away or really slow. You wouldn't want your whole website to not be able to do anything and have any other interactions until you got a response back. You just want to send that off and then wait. And that happens asynchronously. That happens in the background. And meanwhile, you can keep doing other things. So that's why we're using an async function. So we've already seen that the button was pressed. So I'm actually going to add now what I was talking about earlier, an event ID to our invite. So I'm going to start by adding it to this HTML. And then we're going to actually need to template it in. So I want to, when I call the function, I'm going to say this, which refers to the button that I've just clicked. This button, I want to get the value. And we don't have a value yet, but I'm about to add one. And I'm going to make the value be something that we template in, just like we've done up here when we created everything with our invitation. I'm going to make the value be who we send it to. So when we send off the data, I can say, oh, I invited Sarah to the party and she said yes. And then I'm also going to template in an event ID, which is something I haven't actually passed into here yet. So I'm going to jump back to my Python server and pass that along so we can add that in. And for the event ID today, I'm just going to use something that we'll be able to identify easily. Typically, you'd have something called a unique ID, a UID, that you probably generate randomly. If you look in, you sign into something and you can see a large pile of numbers and letters. That might be how I think something like Microsoft or Facebook identifies you. But we don't need to do that because there's not many people using our site, and we just kind of want to see what the files are and name our files after the event and who's running them. So let's go to where we view our invite, the view for our invite, and we need to make an event ID. So that's going to look like we're going to make it look like the sender's name. So it would be Renee has invited you to this event. Being a little bit unPythonic and doing it like this with this camel case ID, but just to keep it the same between our Python and our JavaScript, because if we mismatch them and don't pass the right thing along, then we'll lose our items along the way, and we'll be like, why didn't it work? So I'm just going to make it super simple by having them all in this camel case format, and I'm going to have the sender and then the event, and just separating with this pipe symbol. That way later, if we want to break it back down into the sender and the event, we can just split it out with the pipe, which was super easy. Now we need to send that along. So I'm going to pop that over here. And we're just going to store that, and it's going to go off with our invitation. Okay, so let's jump back to our JavaScript. So now we're going to receive the event ID, and I'm going to log out along with the button was pressed. I'm going to log out the event ID just so we can see that it's coming along, make sure it's all working. So let's take it from the top, make our event. Let's make this bigger. And we're going to hit run. And we can see that Renee invited people to birthday party. So friend here, the name is saying they're coming to Renee's event called birthday party. So we can now work on sending that back to the backend. Great question from Sarah Reichelt. What happens in the Python script if some data is missing from the request args? So I think what happens, we'd have to check it. Are you talking about when you are pulling things back out, Sarah? Or when you are sending, because I can tell you that when we are, where do we go? Just having a little technical difficulty on this side, so I couldn't see Sarah's question. So back to our server. If we are getting data back later, the thing that if we've clicked the button and we try to go into our form, for instance, we forgot to send back the style, so kids or cat or scroll, when we're trying to get that out, then we'll have none there. And then it will probably make something break at some point, depending on exactly what we're trying to do with it. So we'll just say this wasn't in here. The value is none, which is a type in Python. If I do this, it will light up a color. And then if you try to do some, Python-y things to it, it might break your program. Or if you just try to write it out, it might just be empty. So you kind of want to make sure it's there. So you can set things to be required, like we did with our form last week. We said things were required. So that way you didn't have to check that things are there before you try and use them. But at the same time, you do want to protect your server, because we did see that it was just a query string like this that people used to get there. So I could actually just cut parts of it off, or just, type into it, and that would make it be incorrect potentially. So you do want to do stuff to prevent that happening, and checking that things are in the packet and in the URL are important to do when you're doing something more production level. So back to, where were we? So we've just said that we now have the stuff that we want to send off. And now we can start on actually working with that data to send it off. So actually, let's start with, let's get rid of our console log. And we're going to do some of the cuter, funner parts first. So we're going to start by disabling the button that we've got. So we can see that we can't click it again because we've already RSVP'd. So a nice responsive element so people don't go, it's not working, I keep clicking it. So let's start with that. So I'm going to start by creating a variable where I'm storing the button element. So I pointed to it so I can handle it. So I'm going to just call it, I'm just going to call it a but because I can, and document.get element by ID is what we're going to do. So that's saying, okay, there's an element in the thing, and we gave it a name earlier, an ID, and we can just say Rsvp-button to get that element. And then we have a hold on it, and we can start doing things to it. So the next thing is, and it's pretty simple to disable, we just go but.disable. Disabled equals true. It helps if you spell disabled right. And then that's all we need to do to disable that button. So let's give it a go. So refresh the page, and then there we go. Now it goes grayed out, and we can't click it anymore. So we can see that we got rid of our console.log, but it would have stopped us clicking it which means we wouldn't get extra RSVPs coming through. Next up, let's show that hidden div, hidden heading that we put in there to say, we'll see you there. Okay, so we need to, once again, grab the element by ID. We're just going to grab this line so we don't have to write it out again. And we're going to say Rsvp header. And it's going to see this. And then instead of saying Rsvp button, we're going to go to whatever we called that, not in our form, in our invitation. See you there. We're going to grab this ID and we can look that up and put it in here to get a hold of that. And then we can say Rsvp header dot hidden, and we want to set that to false. So let's have a look at that one now. And now we get this lovely celebratory welcoming message to say we're going to see you at the party. Okay, now on to the meaty part. We're going to send off our JavaScript. We're going to send off our Json blob. So we've already seen that we have the data with ID event. I'm going to create a chunk of data. I'm just calling it data, actually. Data, and we're going to put it into a JSON blob. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, I believe. So we're going to make a stringified version, which is saying, hey, we want to have something in the format of a string because we want to be able to send it off. And it's just going to be an object. It looks a lot like a Python dictionary if you're not familiar with JavaScript. And all we want to have in there is the event ID. Okay, cool. And then we need to have actually add our curly brackets. There we go. We've got our JavaScript object there, which is just going to say, hey, you can look up in this thing an ID, and I'm going to give you the value that you're looking for. And then what we need to do next is we're going to create a... We're going to wait here for a response, but we're going to wait in the background. So we're going to say response, and we're going to say await. So just keep hanging out until you get a message back from /Rsvp. So we're going to be creating in our Python server an Rsvp API. So that's going to be a lot like the page we went to before, except it's not going to actually make us change page. We're just going to send our data off to this API, which is just, an API is just a way of saying, here is a way you can interact with this program, and you just need to give us data in a particular format at this address, for instance. And so this is the address of the API, and we're just going to give it our big chunk of data that well, a tiny chunk of data, really, that we've created here. So we're going to be awaiting, and here is, we need to construct the request. So we talked about requests last week, and we had get requests and post requests. And this is actually how you make a request by hand that we can send off. And I'm just going to grab and chuck in a bunch of stuff because it looks, it's the kind of stuff that I like to copy rather than type out myself, because it's pretty long and we don't want to make any mistakes here. And I've definitely already made a mistake because we don't need that bracket there. Okay, so we just need to close off our brackets here. Okay, let's talk about this big chunk of code that I've added, because this is our request. We've said that it needs the credentials, it needs to come from the same place as we started from, so the same place that the page, the invitation we're looking at came from. It's got a type, which is JSON, because we're sending off this JSON blob, and there's the data that we're sending off, which is just this thing that we made here. And then the post request. So that's the most important part, I would say, well, apart from the data, of course, to talk about, though. So let's jump back to our slides so we can think about what the post requests are, because we talked about post requests last week. And we said there's the get request, which is really for read-only stuff. And it's really useful if you want to get a web page that has particular parameters. So we used our query string to create an invitation. And it's really useful because we can copy that query string and then give it to our friends so they can see the invitation we've made for them. But a post request is something where you want to change what's on the back end. So you want to give them some data or do some sort of event based on it. And that's what we're going to be using today. And it's really important to use a post request here, not a get request. There's ways we could use a get request, but the reason we want to use a post request is because if we were to make some sort of form that ticked, yes, I'll be attending, and send it off, just like we made the form to create the invitation, then we'd be saying in here, Rsvp equals true, or Rsvp equals attending or something. But the problem is, if you were to reload that page, you'd send off another Rsvp every time you reloaded it. And maybe you'd copy this link and you'd send it to a friend and they'd load the page and that would send off an Rsvp. And it's not really what we want to do. So that's why we're not going to use a get request here. Maybe you could work out a way to use a get request in a form to do it, but you wouldn't want people to end up landing on this page. You'd want to redirect them somewhere else so they don't actually hang out on this URL and send it to anybody. Sarah is helping with our the closing parentheses. Thank you. I was just getting to that one once we've got back to our JavaScript land. Yeah, that would be much nicer if we were hanging out here, and then we can get rid of our extra parentheses. And so, yeah, somewhere we've missed something. So what am I missing here today? We've got our closing bracket here. We've got this one, and I think we need one more to close it off at the top, to close off our function. Thank you, Sarah, for pointing that out, because yes, this is what we'd like to see in JavaScript. It's just a convention there. So next up, we're going to send this data, which will be fun because then we can receive it on the back end. So let's actually hang out here and send this off because let's hang out in the network tab because it's super useful to be able to see where your stuff goes. So we can go here and we've got all of the things I've sent so far. And if I click this, we've got Rsvp. We've sent something off. We can look at what's in it, which is pretty cool. But we've got a forward for it because we haven't actually created that endpoint yet. So here is our payload. We can see what's inside of it, which is cool. But now we better actually make a place for it to end up. So let's go to our server. And let's create, so we're going to create another route. I'm going to put it at the bottom. It's quite messy in here because we've got a lot of extra learning material in here. So I'm going to call it Rsvp. I'm going to call this Rsvp as well. Okay, great. That's what we called it in our JavaScript. Better check. We did call it Rsvp. Terrific. So inside of Rsvp, we need to, firstly, let's just start by giving it something to give back. Just to be like, okie dokie, we've received your thing and great work. You made a request and we got it. So I'm just going to chuck this in here because I'm just sending back another, custom made response to them so that they can go on their merry way. But we're first going to need to import Json. So we're going to go to the top. So Json is just a built-in Python library because this is just, then we can have Json here. Okay. Okay. Great. That's there. It's all closed off. So yes, we're returning all of this to the client side. So let's go and check it out this time when we do it again. So slowly, there we go. The server has come down. We need to restart it. That's what we need to do. And we jump back into here. Okay, so we'll hang out down here. We can see 405, method not allowed. because we need to say that it's going to be a post request. So we're allowing post requests in here because they're not allowed by default. Oops. Jumping back to here. So in our top line here, we can say what methods are allowed on it. And by default, we only allowed GET requests, but we are going to allow GET and POST requests. That means it's going to be able to send. Let's try one more time. Okay. Here we go. Rsvp 200. And if you haven't done web stuff before, 200 means it's all good. And that's what we like to see. So now we can actually start working with the data that we have in the back end. So let's start by, I'm going to put the response is going to come later, but we're going to start by getting out all of our data. And it's a bit different than how we got it out earlier from our request.args.get. So because it's a post request, so we need to get it out of the payload rather than out of the query strings. So we're going to start by getting the data by saying, give me the request, which we inherently have as part of Flask, and I want the JSON that came with it. And then we can go about getting everything from that. So we can get our event data, which is our event ID that we want to split into two parts because it's got a bunch of stuff going on there. So because it's got both the person who's coming and who sent the invitation and what the event is. So if we're going to say ID is what we called it when we made that JSON blob. And if you're not super familiar with Python, you can just split things by just saying, hey, here's a string, please split it up every time you see one of these. And it's going to turn it into a list. So it might look like Tina, and then it might have Renee. It might be what it looks like when we get it out there. And then we want to grab the first element of that, which is the attendee. So that we say we want the 0th element, and then we want the event ID as well. Event data. And we want the first element. And now what we want to do next is create a file. And ultimately, we're going to push that file into the cloud. But to start off with, we need to make it locally, and then we can send the file to the cloud. So I'm going to say the file name is going to be made up of the event ID. It's just going to be the event ID, which is the name of the person who sent it and the event itself. And then we're going to add txt to the end. And then we want to make it exist. So I'm going to start actually by creating a file as well, a folder to keep all of our data in, just to keep it nice and separate. So we're going to create a folder called data. And this is where we're going to put all of our stuff. So to be more proper, I'm not going to just write /data, data / event ID file name. There's a way you can do this in Python, and it's using the OS library. So I'm going to say file path is OS path .join, and then we can say a local path. It'll look like this. I'm going to put this. I'm going to put this right at the top, just so we have it out of the way. The local path, whenever we want to access the data, is going to be data ./data. Now we can just say local path. And then we can say the file name. So it's going to join those together in a way that for your operating system will make it a valid path, which is the best way to do it. But we do need to import the OS library, just like we did with the JSON one. So we go to the top and we say, also, please give me the operating system library. Okay. So now that we've got that there and the file path is ready to go, we are going to work on putting that data into the file. So a good way to use files in Python is using with open, and then we can say file path. And then we say as, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to call it F. I'm just going to say F because that's our file handle. And then we put all of our stuff, to do with putting things into the file inside of here. I should also say if we're going to W, then to write to the file. And when we use with, it means that if something goes wrong during the writing process, it means the file won't get locked because it hasn't been closed properly. So it automatically closes it at the end of it. So we can now go do everything we want to do with this open file inside here, indented in here. So I'm just going to say write. We're just going to write just a single Rsvp to this file, and it's just going to be the attendee's name, because all we want to do is have a file that might be called Renee birthday party, and it's just going to have a list of people who've come, who has said that they are going to come with the Rsvp button. So let's go and see if this works. Let's refresh this page. Then we're going to, let's open, see if our data file will appear. Hopefully everything is as we want it to be. There we go. We now have the Renee birthday party, and friend, one of my best friends called friend, is now attending my birthday party. So that's now working. So yeah, we could also now go into how to open an existing file and then see who's in there already and see for more people clicking the button, because every time we run this, it's going to overwrite the file currently. But actually, we're not going to have a look at that today because it's not actually how we want to do things with Azure. Because the reason we don't want to just, basically, from what we've done so far, if we uploaded this to GitHub, then it would get deployed to the cloud. And as we saw last week, it lives in the cloud, which is really cool. And you might be thinking, well, Renee, you have this file and you just wrote somebody who's attending to the file. Couldn't you just keep doing that for every person who clicked the button? And that would be really easy. It's really easy to do that in Python. There's even an append function where you can just add someone's name, add a line of, to the file right at the end. But the thing is, the clouds are moving. So the reason we can't just use a file that lives in our repo in the cloud is because every so often, and it's probably a couple of times a day, the servers that you are running your website on get changed over. You get cycled around. And this is how things like Azure can be much cheaper than if you had dedicated space in the cloud that you paid for. Because this way, that if you're not using a lot of space, not using a lot of traffic, basically, then, you can have a small little server. If you have heaps of people coming to it because maybe it's an event that's happening in 1 hour, then you could have a lot of servers deploying your code. And that's why the cloud is putting up and down and moving around where your stuff's actually being deployed. But that means files like the one that we just created don't persist on the internet in the cloud if we store them just like that. So do we just want to use them as temporary storage until we push it up to a database? Because there's a lot of different cloud technologies and things like databases. You can have persistent databases, which means they don't move around like that and they won't lose your data. It will stay there. So that's why we need to use Azure Blob up next. So first, we're going to start by taking a look at the docs because they're super useful. And if you want to start using Azure Blob, I super recommend you take a look at them. They're linked on the landing page right next to episode 3. And then we're going to take a look at how to set up the storage. So let's jump across to the docs. Okay, so where have I put the docs today? Here we are. Okay, so if you do go to the landing page, just scroll down. We've got links to Azure Students and Azure Professionals free and ways to sign up. And then you want to scroll down, and we've got everything from the previous weeks, but I really recommend these two. Set up a storage account. It's really helpful for getting the account set up so you can use the cheapest one that you need to make sure your service works as reliably as you want it to. And Azure Blob quick tips here, it takes you to the docs page. So we've got a course here for setting up the storage account, and then we've got the docs for getting you started. So yeah, I really recommend this course. It tells you, this is how I learned what I do and don't need to use when I'm ticking to set up the storage account. And then the docs here have some really useful stuff, which we'll use in a little bit because you might be using a different operating system to me. So it has all the stuff that you need for your operating system as well. So can't highly recommend those enough. So let's go and jump to setting up our Azure first. Where's our Azure? It's on another page. Here we go. Okay, so we want a storage account because we want to store things. So we're going to hit create. And then what we need to do is, got those all the same. Then we want to use a storage account name. So I'm going to call it live Rsvp. And I have to not use the dashes. Live RSVPs. Great, we can have that name. And then we want to scroll on down. I'm going to put it in Australia because that's where I am. So it'll be faster. Australia East. Great. And then we want to redundancy. Lowest cost one. Locally redundant storage. That's what we're going for. And hopefully my doc stops popping up there. Okay. Okay, next up, what do we need to untick here? There's a couple of things in this page we don't need to always have, I believe. So on advanced, we're going to uncheck cross-reliant storage. Here we go. Allow cross-tenant replication. We don't need that one. You can learn more about it here. Yes, just for making it a little bit simpler. And then jumping across to data protection, we can untick. Wait, we're in networking now. That's fine. All the networking is the same as what is there. You can also find all of this stuff in the course that was linked. It's super useful and will give you some more information. And we're just going to delete all these enable soft delete containers, because that's just meaning like if you accidentally delete something, then like you can bring it back to life in the in the magical console. But we don't need that because we don't really care that much about data at this stage. And encryption, and that's just staying the same. And then we're reviewing and creating, and now we just hang out for a minute while this is all deploying. I'm just going to take any questions here if you have anything right now while we wait for the deploy to happen. Please share the invite page URL. Oh, yes, we can do that. Let's see, what's the best way to do this? I'm actually using several monitors here and 2 different laptops. So I'm just going to pop this to Sarah somewhere so she can send it across. Give me just a second. Okay, so you can check that out here for the one that we deployed last week. Beautiful, most beautiful ever form. And then you can generate your own thing. So we haven't actually deployed our new Rsvp button yet, because the great thing about Azure Blob is actually you can do it all from your computer locally. So I had actually learned to use Azure Blob before deploying any of this to the cloud. And the great thing is Azure lives in the cloud, and we're about to get some keys that mean that we can talk to the Azure cloud from our computer. So even if you didn't want to have a website living in the cloud, you could still use Azure Blob to store your data, which is super, could be super useful if you have a niche case that you want to do, maybe just some data that you want to back up for yourself in a way that you control. So just waiting for that deployment to happen. Any other questions while we're waiting? Okay, well, we'll just get ready for the next part. So it's all going to be in the server. Hey, go to resource. Great. Okay, so next up, what we need to do from here, we can first have a look. We don't have any containers except for this logs one, which is automatically generated. And then we then want to take a look inside of our security and networking tab. I believe that's where we want to go. We want to go where our keys are. There's a lot of stuff here. So let me just remember where I've put the keys. Access keys, that's what I'm looking for. Right there. Okay, so here's a part where I'm not going to show you everything because I'm going to show you the keys first, just for a second, but then I'm going to actually hide the keys and I'm going to rotate the keys because keys are something that you don't want to share with everybody, because if I give everyone these keys, then they can start using my containers and put a bunch of stuff in them and then cost me some money, and they could basically hijack my stuff. So I don't want to do that. So for today, to do this, I'm just going to pop this off the screen and I'm going to go grab my keys while they're over here on a different screen. Okay, so you got to show them to grab them, and then you can grab them and hide them again. So I now have them on my clipboard and you don't need to see them. But now we need to go and we're going to have a look back at the docs. Where did we go? Here we go. Okay, so we want to also get here. So as I said before, this is where you got to use something different for your specific instance. So we're going to create a .env file. So this is where we store our environment variables, which get picked up to use by when we run the code, and then we can grab this. So we don't want to, as we've said, we don't want anyone to get our keys. So when you're deploying code, you use something called environment variables, which is not part of your code base. That way you can keep them in a secret place, and every service has different ways for keeping those secrets somewhere. And you can include them in your Git repo and things like that in a place that you can't see, even if the code is public. For instance, our code is public, but you won't be able to see my items. So I'm going to start by creating a .env file. And then I'm going to paste in what we had here, the Mac thing here, copy that one, pop it in there, and then I'm going to put in the string that I grabbed earlier. So once again, this is all going to happen off screen so you can read these beautiful docs while I grab that key again. And then we'll go back to everybody gets to see what I'm doing. But this is a super good lesson to learn about not sharing your keys, or something bad could happen. And so we want to grab the connection string is what we need to grab. And put it in. We put it in to replace this section in here inside of the quotes. So you'll just have to believe me that that's what I've done now. And I'm going to close going to save my end file, and then I'm going to bring it back so everyone gets to see again. And make sure everything is back to where we had it before. Okay. Our code's gone away. So, great. So now we have an end file, which I'm not going to show you. But you can believe me that there's some good stuff in there. And what we need to do now is VS Code doesn't quite do environment variables perfectly at the moment for how I want to use them. So we're going to use another thing that we're going to import called .env, which is going to let us get out the things that are in that file. And then when we deploy it, has a different system in which you can grab them from, which is more built into it. So we're going to do that. And then we're also going to add that to our requirements.txt. .env. And then we are also, because we're doing Azure stuff, we're going to grab some Azure stuff to put in our file as well. So you can find all of these instructions on this page. It's super helpful. But we're just going to grab this one here and put it in our requirements.txt. And then what you need to do, I've already installed them beforehand, just so, to save us the time of installing it, but you would stop your server and you would once again run pip install requirements -r requirements.txt, and it would install them for you. But I've already done that, so it's all ready to go. Okay, so now that we have that, we're going to finish off this episode just by creating our container. So you can all see that it exists. And then for next episode, we're going to see how you can put things into the container and get things, then also see what's already in the container. So we can use that as our source of truth as to what we're going to be adding to as we update our RSVPs. As we said, we don't want to have to use our storage file as our source of truth because it's going to keep getting lost every time our server gets cycled. So let's start by just making our containers. We're going to jump back to our server file. Got a lot of files open. Here we go. Okay, and we also want to import Azure Storage Blob. So now to get this working, the first thing we need to do is, actually, this gets changed. So instead of having dashes when you import it, you want to have dots. And it will get colored once we actually start using it. Okay, so I'm going to change this a little bit because we want to import specific things because there's a lot of different Azure stuff. So I don't want to import all of it unnecessarily because it slows you down. So we're going to say from this collection of things, from this Azure storage publication, and we're going to use things called a blob client. Import blob client. Blob service client. Blob client. And one more. Container client. Okay. Cool. So we've got all those. And then what happens next is we want to go down to our server location. And actually, we're going to just do it at the start here. So whenever our server starts up, we're going to say, hey, you should make a file location to put all of this stuff in. And because it's got really long strings, I'm also going to put this in just like this, copy and pasting it in. So this is where we're making our file. Make container. So we have a container on Azure Blob, and then we put blobs into it. I'm going to call the container name RSVPs. Okay. And then we are going to do the line that makes a container. And then hopefully it'll work. And then we'll wrap up with any questions. Please get your questions in now if you have any, so we can answer them. Okay, let's start by running our server. And then a module named Azure. Because I have not actually activated my virtual env. So we need to go source, and then we've called it web app /bin/activate. And now, fingers crossed, we still lost Azure. Let's figure that out. So, very strange because this was working just earlier today. That's why I installed it beforehand, so I could check that it all worked. But let's start again by installing requirements.txt. Install -r requirements.txt. Fingers crossed, everybody. Oh no, something horrible has happened. Well, that's going to be fun. So something I was trying to figure out earlier. So I feel like it potentially needs to have VS Code restarted. So I'm actually going to leave you with that today, but I will show you one I prepared earlier. So if we just jump across to, where have we put Azure now? So we've got some virtual environment problems happening. So I'm going to jump out to other. So I've got my test RSVPs, which I was testing earlier today. So I promise that this all does in fact work, except when you need to restart something. So we're going to go down to containers, and you can see that we will get a container. And by just running the code that I've written there, when it runs and just starting the server, this container will get made. And then next time we'll be showing how to put birthday party invitations and whatever invitations to events you want to have into the container with Python. Yeah, so sorry that I couldn't show you the proper fully working one there, but I'll just wrap up for today. And so next time we're going to, finish adding those RSVPs and then also add a way to show them so we can actually see who's coming. But there's a super cool way you can actually just download the RSVP file from Azure as well. So if you were just feeling really lazy and you didn't want to write, a web page just so you could see who was coming to your baby shower, you could actually just download them. So we'll have a look at that. Just a reminder to add your own invite. I hope you like homework. I know that I do. So please make an invite. I'd love to see them, and let me know on my Twitter if you have any questions. I'd love to showcase them on the stream and on Twitter. And finally, do check out the links. Jump to the repo. It's also linked on the series page. And check out the docs I showed you earlier. They're super useful, and get onto those free Azure subscriptions and trials. They're super useful, and you get a bunch, like $100 or $150 of credit. And if you're a student, there's also a bunch of things that you get to use for free, like hosting websites and some basic stuff that they don't ever charge you for while you're a student. So that's really cool. So thank you all for coming. I look forward to finishing this off with you next time. I'll hand it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Renee. I appreciate it. We've just got a question coming through from Chet, I believe. Is Azure only for school students?
No. So there's a few different options. So for university students is who this student subscription is targeted for. There is something for school students, but because they're under 18, they're not eligible for all of the same things. But there is some free stuff that they get as well. And then also, like, Azure is for professionals as well, and it's used widely in industry to host websites just like this. And it has heaps of tools, machine learning tools, all kinds of stuff for professionals, for corporations, etc. So there's just some free trials and free subscription money you can get by signing up for it and giving all of this a go. So please get on there and do that. It's super fun.
Great. Thanks, Renee. So you can check out all those links. We've put them in the question section there, and then you can just check out the other additional links on the series page as well. Thank you to Renee for the third episode. We've got the fourth episode next week, so please do go register. You can do that either directly through our meetup page or through the series page that Renee's sharing the link in that last slide there. So thank you everyone for sending your questions through. Have a good rest of your afternoon, evening or morning, and we'll see you next time for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. Thanks, Renee.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Bye.